Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to Good Grieving
Welcome to Good Grieving, yeah.
with Sturls.
And Kath.
Yep, we're here to just talk about all the uncomfortable things that we're making comfortable.
Yeah. That's been a really common theme all the way through, and I think it's been awesome to have these conversations, to put this stuff out there. And tonight we're going to talk about your personal experiences.
Ooh.
Right?
Yes.
So for those of you that aren't aware, Kathy wrote this book, The Hardest Not the Worst Year, A Widow's Journey. It's a fantastic book, Kath. I really enjoyed reading it.
You get all shy.
Now, I am, of course, biased because we've been friends for a very long time. I knew John very well.
Yes.
We were close for many years. Mason's 13.
And Jacob is
19.
Yeah, so we've known each other 17 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we spent a lot of time together. We've worked together. We've done music things together. We've done various projects together and
songs together.
Yeah. And John has always been, he always was, through all those things, he was always such an amazing support. And one of the most incredible gifts I've ever been given was from you and John. It was a guitar that you guys bought for me. And I still have it. Her name is Shirley.
Shirley, named after your grandma.
That's right, named after my grandma. For any guitar aficionados, it's Paul Reed Smith, Paul's guitar. It's absolutely gorgeous.
The case is gorgeous.
The case is gorgeous, all upholstered and just
it's like a paisley print. I'm just like, wow, like just keep the case. You don't want guitar too.
And the thing is, I remember you telling me that when you talked to John about that, there's just a bit of glimpse into the meaningfulness that I have in my heart for John. When you talked about I told you about a dream I'd had about a guitar, and I described it to you, and he said, "Well, that's what we need to do.
Yep,
we need to get that for him." And I broke down in tears. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I do remember. I do remember. I actually videotaped you. I
sobbed.
Yeah.
It was, and
we wanted it to be happy, and it was like it's interesting because when John always said, when you give a gift, you give it without expectation. Like there's nothing expected. It's just a gift. When you expect something, it's a business transaction.
Right.
And it was a gift. And can I just say that the gift gave back. Like he's such an incredible musician, singer, songwriter, all of that. And just to hear you play her, and remember you had to get back into it because you played the acoustic all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
And bass. So you diligently worked on it and you became the lead guitar player many times over.
Yeah, I mean it was a huge inspiration for me, and that was the kind of guy that John always was. As long as I've known him and you, that was always the dynamic. You guys were always very generous, and John had a sense of integrity about him that I always found just remarkable. So reading through this book, it was a tough read because I knew John.
Yeah, I wondered what it would be like.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed to say I teared up and cried a couple of times reading through this, remembering
Me too.
the man that he was and all the things that he did and the place that he still holds in our hearts. And so going through this book was amazing to hear your expressions of your feelings, of your experiences leading up to and in the days following John's passing.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So this book is amazing. It's called The Hardest Not the Worst Year, A Widow's Journey. And it's a breathtaking account of what this is like for people who are not expecting it. And for people that don't know what to do and how to go about it. They try to learn as they find these new situations and new circumstances coming up. And so I have saved a few spots in here where there are some. I feel like
you're like Oprah. She will do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the first thing here is the first thing I've got tagged here is in chapter 3.
Oh.
And so the chapter is Till Death Do Us Part, and the things they don't tell you. And so there's a line here that struck me when we talk about people trying to, when people want to die at home,
Yes.
or when they want to be surrounded by their loved ones. You
Yeah.
know, they want to die in a peaceful scenario.
Mhm.
You know, this is this idea that people have. And you wrote in here, John died at 7:42 p.m. It was neither beautiful nor quiet. It was distressing, traumatic, and devastating.
Mhm.
And I think that was one of the things that felt like a gut punch as I
Yep.
was reading this, because it's very honest. And
Oh.
the truth is, there's no way it's not going to be distressing and
Yeah.
traumatic and devastating. So that was one thing that really sort of helped me realize that this is going to be, and I mean, it's chapter 3, it's relatively early on. I knew it was going to be a very honest account.
Yes.
But that was one of the moments that I realized this is going to be absolutely true account of your experience.
Yes.
So when you were writing this,
Mhm.
the distress, the trauma, the devastation that you felt, I'm curious, at what point did you decide that I need to write about these things that I experienced? Because they're huge, huge feelings.
It's interesting. I tried to write this book earlier, like in the first year. I ended up writing it at the beginning of 2024, like March. But I tried to write it earlier, and I was writing a completely different book. It was more facts, and it wasn't about my journey. It wasn't. It didn't feel authentic to me.
Right.
And I think I wrote an honest account. That I wrote shortly after he died. Actually, it's bits and pieces of things that I had written. It's a part of the process for me. It's very cathartic to write.
Right.
And it was just the honest truth. You watch movies and you can read books, and they can glorify death, and it can be this, where you're holding hands and you're looking into each other's eyes and you're saying I love you, and they're looking at you and saying I love you, and then there's this peaceful end.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that, but I didn't know so much. I didn't know so many things about the process of dying. So I wrote the honest account of what I witnessed in that moment in time. Now, hindsight, and I think at the end of this chapter, I talk about a good death.
Right. Yes.
And I was on my knees, sobbing and begging and saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's not supposed to be this way. I promised you that it wouldn't be like this, like I had any control over how it was going to be.
Right.
But he died the way he wanted.
Right.
He died at home. He asked for two things. He wanted to come home, and he wanted me to hold his hand, just to be there with him, holding his hand. Be careful what you ask people to do, because I'm very literal, but it was like I would not leave his side. It was very difficult for me to leave. And oftentimes what will happen is people will wait till you leave to die. He did not wait till I left. He died with me there. But I just wrote what was in my heart, exactly how it felt. And I felt like maybe someone else needed to read that. I wrote the book that I couldn't find.
Right, exactly. And I think I
didn't want to scare anyone.
No.
But I wanted to tell people this is the honest account of what I've experienced. There are people who will tell you it was a beautiful moment. And that comes with knowledge, support, and all of those things, with the right, like hospice care, which you can have at home, all of that. Those are some things that we didn't get.
Right. And going through this whole book, that is what jumps out at me again and again, is the fact that, like you said, this is the book you didn't have. This is the book you couldn't find. The thing that would prepare you for some of the unknowns and some of the things that you talked about that surprised you and that you were unprepared for.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And that actually leads me nicely into one of the other things that I found just amazing. It's in, what chapter are we in here? Chapter 7. And so this was, you were talking about finding a letter that you had written to John.
Oh, yes.
From many years before.
Yeah, I was 18.
And you didn't know that he kept it.
No.
And so there's a line in here where you read it out loud to him, and you cried, and he said, "Of course he kept it. It's beautiful. It's a description of your beginning, and that's amazing." But the thing that really struck me, and this is, I think, something that a lot of people will grapple with a little bit, is the things that they learn about somebody either immediately before or immediately after somebody's gone. And so there's a line in here. You said, "How am I only finding this out now?" You've been together for decades.
Yep.
Right?
43 years.
43 years. And you were still finding things out about him at that point.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, so that feeling of thinking, how am I only finding out about this now? And presumably it's, I need more time to learn more of these things because there's something else I don't know. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that experience.
I was so shocked when I went downstairs because we moved so many times. Like John was in the military. I was an Army brat. So I was used to, you move and you get rid of things you don't need. So I didn't keep a lot of things. And that's why it's probably a really great idea to have a keepsake box, just things that you think are like mementos, like letters, things like that. Of course, I wish I did keep them, but I didn't. And he kept things, and I didn't know it. We didn't have those kind of conversations. He had his stuff, and I didn't go through his stuff. It was in the weirdest place too. Like I was like, what? And it's on old, like, it's not even paper, typewriter paper, but it was really, really thin and kind of crispy. It's very weird. And I've got like handwriting spelling corrections because I spell so terribly. And I was just laughing. It's a very sweet letter from a person so in love. And I read it to him and I said, I feel exactly the same way now. But I think we don't know everything about our person. And I just found it was like such a gift to actually find that out. I don't resent that I didn't know everything about him. I got letters from guys that he was in the military with, telling me stories about the kind of soldier he was, how many times they almost died, and like all these things that he never talked about. Those were like, he wasn't, he would talk about it if you asked him, but if you don't know what to ask, he's not going to talk about it.
Right.
He wasn't really that kind of person. So it was like, I got to see him from someone else's perspective. And I thought it was just really, really sweet that he was that romantic.
Yeah.
I thought I made him romantic. I thought I forced him to be romantic, but I didn't.
Yeah, it turns out he was a softie and a romantic deep down the whole time.
Yep, he was.
That is awesome. And yeah, that I loved reading that, and just the idea that you can share a life with somebody and they can still surprise you. Right?
It's like you're always unpacking something. So I always say, like, open up your conversations. Think about things that you want to know about the other person, and also respect their boundaries, because even if they are your person, maybe there's some stuff they don't want to talk about. Right.
And I think it's important to even point that out too, that, these are people that we love. These are whole, fully formed human beings. They have aspects of them that we may not be familiar with. And I think it's probably fair to say that there's in the process of grieving somebody that you've lost, there's probably a lot of different instances that come up of regrets and guilt that you didn't know something, or, how could I not know this? But that's a totally normal and healthy relationship where there are some things you maybe don't know about the other person because it's something that's very personal to them. They want to keep just to themselves. Or it's something that, like John talking about his military experience, it's not that he didn't want to talk about it, it's that he wouldn't volunteer because it was, if you asked him, he'd be willing to talk, but it wasn't something that he would just...
It took him, like he had to unpack a lot of things. It took years, but in the book, how I felt in that moment when I was writing about it, I felt like, oh my gosh, how am I only finding out this now?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know you were such a romantic.
Mhm.
I was horrified that I didn't. I'm like, why wouldn't I know that?
Yeah.
But now looking back, I'm like, yeah, he wasn't just this cardboard person. He had so many layers to him. He
Right.
was an onion.
Yes. Very much.
Yeah. So yeah, I looking at it now, I can look at it and appreciate it for what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. There is another. Oh, where did I put it now? I'm going to see if I can find it. Oh, this is going to be.
Which chapter?
Here we go. Chapter 8.
Oh,
So
the one I never wanted to write. This
yeah.
one, this chapter, it took me. Yeah, I don't even. It wasn't written. The book isn't written in any particular order.
Right.
The order came after.
So chapter 8 is called Jack's Moment, and this is a description of your grandson Jack. Yeah. And he was the only grandchild.
Yes.
That saw John in his final days.
Yes.
And the decision that you made to introduce Jack into that situation, and the way you talked about your feelings afterwards. And now I just want to make it perfectly clear. I think you made the right call. I think you did the right thing by talking to Jack and giving him an opportunity to see his papa. Now, that not every kid is going to be ready for that. Not every kid is going to be comfortable with that, making that decision, all the rest of it. Yeah. But I do know Jack, and I do know your family. And I think it was a beautiful moment that you allowed him to be present for. John had some feelings about it.
Yes.
And the thing I want to talk about here, because we were just talking about regret and about guilt, about not knowing somebody. Yeah. There's an amazing line in here that I think is worth sharing.
Okay.
And so I'll just read this brief paragraph here. Would I do it again? Only if I told him first. My heart didn't trust him enough to say yes. I never gave him the opportunity to make the decision. And I understand that feeling torn up about that. But the next line is my favorite. It said, "This is my regret. Note I said regret because I let go of the guilt, knowing I never meant to hurt either of them." Yeah. I think it's so huge to point out the distinction between regret and guilt. Yeah. Because I can totally understand feeling regret about a situation where you weren't sure about the decision you made and it didn't go the way that you had hoped it would, or that there was some feelings that were difficult to parse and to grapple with. Yes. But recognizing it's a decision that, given the opportunity, you would have done something slightly different. Like you said, only if you told him first, only if you'd had that conversation, but given the opportunity to say yes. But being able to release that guilt and still recognize that there is a part of you that would have done something slightly different is huge. And I'm just curious about that process. How did you come to that point where you realized I can regret it but not feel guilt? Writing it. Really? Writing it. I struggled. I struggled for well over a year. And that's why I didn't want to write it. I felt so guilty. I was ashamed. You'll have to read it. It's a very good chapter. I'm really glad I wrote it, because I think there's a lot of us out there that there's things that we do in a moment. And I think I even say in there, like, my intention was, well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Right. Yeah. I will often have flashbacks and think, oh my gosh, the day he came home from the hospital, he was so excited to be here. If we would have had all the grandkids here, it would have been a perfect time. Right. But it wouldn't have been, because he had to go through the oxygen test, which was really horrible for him. Then he got really, really sick, and it just went to crap. Like, there was never a perfect moment, like Wendell. Anyway, what I was going to say, so writing this was what gave me, I could see it, and I could forgive myself. And talking to Jack and hearing what he had to say and what his perspective on it, which was different, and we all have a slightly different view. And Jack said to me, "Grandma, it didn't happen that way." And I said, "Jack, our hearts protect us from things that are too hard sometimes." But that's how he saw it. But I got him to read it, and I asked him what he thought about it, and he said, "It's really good, Grandma." That's awesome.
I'll be right back
Sure.
to let my dog out. Carry on, Sterling.
Yeah, I actually wanted to just talk for a brief moment about that concept of the difference between guilt and regret. And in my own experiences with my own therapist and working through some big feelings I've had about some things that have happened in my life, it's been easy for me to assume something is guilt, a feeling that I'm experiencing, an emotion that I'm feeling, or whatever it is, that I just think, well, I just feel bad, I feel guilty. And recognizing that there is a difference between guilt and regret. Guilt, I remember talking to my therapist about this, and he had said that if guilt is a strong emotion for you in various circumstances, it's easy to just mistake other things for it. And one of the things he challenged me to do was to look at these emotions, to really experience them, feel them through, and identify, what is this really? Is it a combination of things? Why am I feeling this? What's prompting it? Is guilt an appropriate response?
Right.
And there's a lot of times, and especially in grieving, there are so many regrets that dress up in guilt costumes.
Oh my
Right?
gosh,
There's so many things you think, I wish I had said this, I wish I had done this. You don't know.
You don't know what you don't know, and you
Right.
don't know about the time. And
Yeah.
it's like, people are telling you live in the moment. It's really hard sometimes to live in the moment because
Yeah.
so much shit is flying at you, right?
Yeah.
Like you're like, oh, I missed the moment. Oh, I was on my
Yeah.
phone, or I was watching this really good show. And
Yeah.
I think like, oh, if I had only kissed him goodbye,
Yeah.
if I only said I love you.
Mhm.
And sorry if I was interrupting you
No,
there,
no.
but in this realm, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, John lived for, we were together for almost 44 years. So we had 44 years of I love yous,
Mhm.
44 years of fighting, 44 years of disagreements, 44 years of agreeing, 44 years of just a great life.
Yeah.
A real life, not perfect. So we tend to isolate on a moment in time
Mhm.
and go, I should have done better.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
know so many people who have lost someone instantly.
Mhm.
I lost my mother. She died suddenly. There was no goodbye. There was no nothing. We were
Yeah.
supposed to go spend Christmas with them. We didn't get to do that. I was going to call her the night before, but I didn't. I'm like, I'll call her tomorrow.
Yeah. See, in
I
hindsight,
regret that. I don't feel guilty anymore. I did
Yeah.
feel guilty,
Yeah.
but I didn't do it to hurt her.
Mhm.
I just decided, but I guess my guidance would be, if you really feeling compelled to do something,
Yeah.
send the person a text, phone them.
Yeah. Say the things that you wish you had said, all those kinds of things. And I think those sentiments are really powerful. But I think in this instance, in talking about that line, talking about the difference between guilt and regret, I think it's important to just acknowledge that a regret is something that you wish you had done differently.
Yeah.
You never did anything wrong in the first place.
Well, you
just
weren't
wish you had done it
setting out,
differently.
and
Right.
you weren't setting out to hurt someone.
You weren't trying to do anything wrong. You weren't trying to, you were, like you say, the best intentions were there. And I think it's fair to say that guilt is not appropriate in a place where hindsight tells you that things could have been different. And I struggle with the word should. I have for a
Shouldn't
long
all over
time.
the place. Yeah.
If you should have done this or should have done that. Guilt is in one of those places where you should have done something different, I think. And this is not like a clinical perspective.
No, and
this is my own
and I would say
experience.
Also, guilt, to feel guilty, I really do believe, is when you intentionally do something to hurt someone.
Yeah.
That was not my intention.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I couldn't predict, I hoped that the outcome was going to be a certain way.
Right.
And were there benefits? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Did they outweigh the pain in the moment? I don't know, because I can't answer for John.
Right.
But Jack has said to me he was really glad that he saw him.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that, just to be really blunt about it, I think Jack's experience and the benefits he had from that, and that he will have for the rest of his life, I think John would have agreed that it was worth it.
Yeah.
It would have been hard. I know it would have been hard for John to be there and to have Jack come in and see him that way. But if he was able to know how Jack feels about it now, and will for the rest of his life, knowing he had the chance to say I love you to his papa one more time, that's huge. And that's something that Jack will carry with him forever.
And that John got to
And
say,
John got to say it back. And I think if John had known, and if he had, I mean, if he had had the opportunity to see what that would mean to Jack, I think he would have volunteered it.
yeah,
But
maybe.
again, hindsight is
Yep.
2020. Knowing what the right thing is to do in a moment when you're trying to respond to things as well as you can in the moment.
Oh,
We are never at our best when we're making decisions that we don't have all the information.
and when we're in fear, trauma,
exactly,
grief, all of that, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I have so much empathy for her, for the decision she made.
Yeah.
And for John, and for Jack and Sarah.
Yeah.
We all it was a pretty traumatic experience.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you don't carry guilt from that.
No,
that was one of the
anymore.
Things that made me happiest when I read that was the fact that recognizing that you can wish you had done something differently. And I mean, I think everybody, that's a pretty universal experience. I think everybody has moments they think back to and go, I really wish I had said something different, or I wish I had done something different, or I wish I had made that call or sent that text or spent that extra few minutes or whatever it is. But feeling guilt, I don't think has a place in situations like that.
I agree.
Being able to distinguish between regret and guilt is huge. And so I'm very happy.
Thank you.
To know that you don't carry guilt for that, because I think you did the right thing.
Thank you.
Now
he's got them earmarked.
I folded over so many. There's so many great things in here.
Aww,
so many pieces of wisdom. Now, speaking about Jack's moment. Okay. This was a tough one for me, and I don't want to spend too much time digging into it because I imagine it's hard. But you talk about the sound of anguish.
Oh, yes.
Hearing Jack crying.
Yep.
The sobs that he was saying,
yep.
or the sobs that he was making, and the sound that comes from deep within your soul, an ache that cries out without remorse, only pain. We all felt it. I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to dig too much into it because I imagine that is a very difficult memory to relive. But I think that was a moment that Jack and you and Sarah, everybody, I think that's one of those moments that I think is there was an element of bonding, if that's the right word. All of you felt it. I think that was the thing that struck me the most.
John felt it, and that's when he looked at me and said, "How could you do this?"
Yeah,
and it was well, and I talked to John. I talked to Jack after. We were walking outside, and I said, how are you? And he said, oh, Grandma, my mom told me everything. But it just came rushing at me so fast. It was so real. Seeing him. So, and he, it was moments. Jack is a real caring, loving kid, and him and his papa, he was the first grandson, super close bond. So it was devastating for him. And that's what John did not want. John, and here's what many dying people will say even, and this is when you know better, you can actually maybe even coach them and listen to them, not try to change their mind, but give them some perspective. John's fear was causing them pain. He couldn't stop that. The pain of losing him, they knew he was dying. They knew they were losing their papa, and they didn't understand why they couldn't say goodbye. They didn't understand why they couldn't see him. They just wanted to love him. And exactly what you said, if he could have, been hovering over and seeing and understanding from a different perspective, I'm sure that he would have taken it under advisement, because he was a wonderfully loving man, but he didn't want to hurt them. So to anyone out there who's dying or knows anyone who's dying, it's you can't, you can't stop us from grieving. We love you. Grief is about love, and they're just trying to protect us. And there are people who say, I don't want a funeral. I don't want this. I don't want that. The funeral, the celebration of life is not for the person who has died. It's for the people who, and that's Pastor John who taught me that. It's for the people that they leave behind.
Absolutely. The other thing I found striking about that, the way you said it, the sound of anguish, Um,
And
that
literally, honestly, I
I
can still hear it.
yeah, and I think the thing that really struck me about that was that anguish is something that all of you felt.
Mhm.
Jack had the opportunity to be surrounded by his family and express that.
Yes.
And I think that's pretty huge because a
Yeah.
lot of people don't get the chance to do that. And I think a lot of people, when they do first experience proper, well, proper is a rough word for it, but profound, I should say,
Yeah.
grief, that loss,
They're real
that
guttural,
anguish.
deep,
Yeah.
like, oh my, yeah.
I wonder how many people only ever express that in isolation.
Yeah.
They feel that, they
Oh.
express it. But being able to have people around you that you love to be
Mhm.
able to support you and experience that with you, I think is pretty huge. So again, I think you did the right thing by inviting Jack in to have that moment, and it makes for a very
Well, I did it, and I can't change it.
no, and it makes for a very it's fantastic. This chapter, I imagine it was very hard to write.
I'm so glad I wrote it, though.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I wrote it.
Well, and you say in here, forgive yourself for the decisions you made with your heart and not your head, for lacking the foresight to see that this would hurt them, and you for wanting to be right, for all these things.
Yep.
Forgiveness of yourself for moments that you regret is absolutely huge. And I think that process of forgiveness is where we go from guilt into regret.
Yeah.
Regret is something that, again, you can carry that, and you can navigate your way through those feelings. But guilt is a different animal, I think, and I think it's really amazing.
And we have so much to carry. We don't need to carry guilt.
No, exactly.
Something else we don't need to carry.
Exactly.
No.
Now, next piece I wanted to just touch on here is chapter 11, the promise. Now, this chapter was amazing. You talk a lot about forever in this chapter.
Yeah.
And the fact that you talk about the relationship between love and grief a lot in this book, but in this chapter you put an amazing line in here that your grief is John. You said, my grief is John. And I would love to have you just talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's very interesting because before that statement, I talk about like how patient. Grief gets a bad rap. Like it's like, oh, and I'm not going to say, I haven't said, I just want to get over this. It's hard. It is really hard, and processing it. But I learned to understand, because it was like, your grief is directly related to the relationship you have with the person, place, or thing that you lose. And in this case, my grief is John, because the way that I engage with my grief and the way my grief comes at me more often than not is very patiently waiting. I need to get your attention. I'm not going to be an asshole. I'm going to wait. And sometimes I'm surprised. And now, as I've navigated through this for almost 2 years, I'm surprised less by it. But my grief is John, because it's all about John. It's the love I have for him, which I will always carry. So that's really what I meant. I used to call my grief her.
Right.
And I'm like, because I felt like she was me. But she's not.
Right.
He's not. They're not. For me, it's John.
Yeah.
It's all associated with him and his memories. And there's wisdom. My grief teaches me something new every day, which he was a great teacher. He taught me so much in life, and he continues to teach me in death. So yeah, I think that's it.
I like that. And I like how you talked about your grief and it sort of having an identity and equating it to John, because John was always a compassionate and peaceful kind of person when it came to, he was
unless you
supportive,
cross
and
the
he
line.
That
might be part of the grief too.
I'd imagine.
I get addressed every once in a while.
But the fact that he was the man that he was is reflected in the way that you perceive your grief is huge. And I think it's fair to say too, again, the fact that you say that your grief is about the person, place, or thing. It's a representation of the relationship you had,
Yeah.
and with the magnitude of the loss. And so saying that your grief is John, I think it was just a really beautiful way to put the fact that the way that you perceive it, the way that you experience it, reminds you of him, and it has sort of characteristics that are tied to him. But of course, it's his absence, it's the things of him that remain, it's all the love you have for him.
Yeah.
All those things are what make that grief exist in the first place. Without John, there would be no grief.
Yeah,
right? If he had never existed, or if you had never met him, you would not be.
I would not be grieving
the
him.
grief would not exist.
No, and it's interesting because it was 18 years ago yesterday. My mother died suddenly, and yesterday was a moment in time where my grief was my mom. It was, and a very different type of grief.
Yeah.
It's been 18 years. I didn't deal with the grief of the death of my mother and felt any grief for years.
Right.
Because I didn't even know how to do it. I did what I normally did, shoved it down.
Yeah.
So my mother taught me about grief in her death years later. And then when John died, I don't think I could have suppressed it if I tried. The intensity of the loss was too great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I honestly, each one of us, like you lost your grandma, Shirley, you have a guitar that you play. And I often wonder, like when you play that guitar or you pick it up or you see it, you see her, do you think of your grandma?
I do, yeah.
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 Whereas she didn't even have anything to do with that, but she has everything to do with it because of her love of your music and how she really encouraged you.
Oh yeah, she was a huge supporter of my. I started playing piano when I was a little kid, and she supported that, and I started playing guitar, and when I started playing with my band in high school or just after high school,
it's a punk band.
We formed a punk band, a couple of friends and myself, and we were playing in my parents' garage, and it was unheated and uninsulated, and so it was getting later into the year, and so she paid for us to insulate it and get it, put a heater in so that we could practice through the cold months and stuff. Like, she was a huge supporter of my music, and she actually, at the time when we did that, she had moved into my parents live on an acreage, and she had sold her place and had used the money to build a little mother-in-law sort of suite on the property. And so she was up at the far end of the driveway there, and we were at the garage, and she could hear us playing. And so she and it was punk music, and she was a 76, 77-year-old woman, and
you can appreciate good music.
Never, yeah, and she was never she never struck me as a person who enjoyed punk rock, but she loved hearing me play and be enthusiastic about music. So that was part of the reason that I thought, if I'm going to name this absolutely amazing guitar that inspired me and made me want to play again and invest a bit more time and energy into developing those skills that I'd sort of let slide, it was the right call for me to remember her and her support for me in that, and to just and tie that memory and that person that she was and what she was to me into that. And I do think about her a lot.
That's, I think, probably the most beautiful part of that whole story is that Shirley is in everything that you do with Shirley.
Yeah.
I think that's so good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for asking these questions. Do you have some more?
I have one last one.
One more.
I have one last one, and it's. I know how long have we been talking?
We're good.
It's already been a half hour already, but okay. There's one last thing, and it actually does tie in fairly nicely to this when you talked about the magnitude of the loss. There's a line in chapter 13, and chapter 13 is where did she go? Talking about finding yourself and finding your way back to you. And there's a great line in here that I thought was worth just chatting about briefly here before we close up here. And you say, it's meant taking risks and stepping out of my comfort zone, even when every fiber of my being wanted to retreat into the safety of the familiar, but nothing is the same. I think that was a really poignant line, and it pointed out to me, and it made me realize not just the magnitude of the loss, just the sheer size of it, but the variety and the breadth of that loss.
Yeah. Because
John was a part of every aspect of your life for such a long time. When you say you're looking for and yearning for that familiar, nothing is familiar because he's not in it. And I
No.
just wanted to ask you about that and about coming to that realization when you're trying to find yourself, who you are now,
Mhm.
who you have been all this time, and what remains, and how it looks and how it
Yeah.
feels, because that is a paradigm shift,
Mm.
and that lack of familiarity would be
Yeah.
everywhere.
It's so interesting because I never understood it
Mm-hmm.
before. Like I was a, I am an independent person.
Yeah.
I was an independent person in our marriage. We were both people who like to do our own thing. We were not attached at the hip.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but interestingly enough, when he died, I felt like I had no ability to make a decision. Um, I I was lost. Like I literally have no sense of direction. And he was my geographical artist. It didn't matter. Thank goodness for GPS, but he was better. Um, but I had lost trust in myself. Lost faith in myself. You lose. There's secondary losses.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big things is losing who you are now, because you're still Kathy Powell,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not Mrs. Kathy Powell. You're not married anymore. They've taken
Right.
that away from you. You are a widow.
Mm-hmm.
You are not married anymore. And I'm like, but I feel married.
Mm-hmm.
That was a challenge for me. So it's like, yeah, you will never be the person you were
Right.
before that loss. Everything does change, but you're still in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like navigating through all of that to, and I don't like to call it new normal. But it is. I don't even know if it's normal. It's just the newness of, you end up looking at things completely differently. You
Yeah.
don't have to ask anybody's. This is okay. This is from the perspective of I was 61 at the time, a 61-year-old woman who I didn't have, it was just me and him. Our kids are grown, grandkids, all that. But if I was going to do something, I had to make the decision.
Right.
I didn't have to check with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, it's very unsettling.
Yeah.
Me? I'm making the decisions now. How does that sit with everyone? So I'll tell you, in all honesty, I've made some real blunders. I've done things I never thought I would ever do. I've learned more in the last 2 years than I think I learned in the last 10. I've aged. I know I've aged. But I see life and I feel life more richly and more beautifully. Right. Because there's a different perspective. Life is precious. Mm-hmm. Moments are precious. One of the things John was always about, moments, not things. Things are just things. Yeah. But I like things too. I'm glad that I have things of his that I can hold on to. Yeah. But I also have memories of him. So and pictures and videos. And yeah, everything, like trying to hold on to the stuff of who I was before was impossible. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not even the woman I was when I wrote that. Right. And it's interesting. I'm going to say something I don't know if I put it in the book, but there is a new sense of freedom that you never had before because it's just you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that freedom comes at such a huge cost. And it's not a beautiful freedom all the time, but sometimes it's like, oh, I can pick the rug and I don't even have to ask anybody. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going on a trip. Yeah. I'm getting a puppy. Mm-hmm. What an idiot.
There are so many things that as I was reading through this book, I think one of the things, Widow's Journey was a perfect title, because this is not a snapshot into a moment. This is an account of a process. Yeah. And I mean, I've known you for a long time. I know who you were as Mrs. Kathy Powell. I know who you are now as Kathy Powell, the powerhouse author and grief coach and end-of-life doula. All the things that you've done since John's died and before that and everything. I mean, the way you described that, finding yourself again, I think was my favorite part. I'm glad we ended on that, because that was a really beautiful sentiment. The idea that who you were, cannot continue to be exactly who you were, because
Yeah.
so much of what made you do the things you did
Mhm.
and the
It's a
decisions you
partnership.
made, exactly. It was a combination of factors that have all. I think I mentioned this in one of our earlier episodes, but losing somebody like a spouse, especially who you shared a life with, how could it possibly be even remotely the same? The you share so many things with this person, and every aspect of things change when they're gone.
Mhm.
And it's like losing, you've all of a sudden woken up and you've got no left arm or left leg.
Yeah,
Or you
there's a
wake
part
up
of
and you've
you.
lost one of your senses entirely, and you have to learn how to navigate this world. the
Yeah, that's
the,
a
the
very good description.
and the majority of who you are and the things you valued and all those things, those remain, but how you go about your life is so radically different in so many tiny ways and so many big ways all at the same time. It takes time to navigate that and to find yourself again
Mhm.
and find out who you are now. And I think it's a beautiful encouragement for anybody that has lost somebody or is going through some of the anticipatory grief because they have somebody
Yes.
who is terminal, that that they are about to lose. The idea that you are going to remain, but you're going to have to discover who that person is. And I think that's, like you said, there's a freedom in it. There's excitement in being able to discover these parts of yourself, to
Yeah,
learn how to
and you
have
know what? I
faith in
love that you
yourself in
said
a
that
new
because I
way.
think that people, grieving people, how can I be excited?
Yeah.
We can be excited. We're alive.
Yeah.
You can be happy
Mm-hmm.
and sad.
Yeah.
Like you can feel joy, and we're sitting in the room where John died.
Yeah.
And he lived
Yeah.
much longer
Yeah.
and spent a lot of time in this room while he was alive.
Yeah.
So it doesn't cause me pain to be in this room, which
Yeah.
surprises a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But it caused me pain to be in the bonus room.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, listen, there's no rhyme, no reason. Your
Yeah.
grief is your grief.
Yeah.
But thank you for reading it.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we got to do this. I've been excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm so
As I
glad
was
you read
reading
it.
it, every time I stumbled across something, I gotta fold that page over and I
Mhm.
gotta
I
highlight
love
that and I
it.
gotta make sure that I can. But I mean, it's fantastic. It's an excellent book. It's very candid. It's very honest. It's very raw in a lot of places.
Yep.
There's a couple of points where I had to close it and put it down because I was so choked up. There's a bit in here about the Velveteen Rabbit, about becoming
Isn't that? I
real. It's
know.
beautiful. I wanted to talk about that a bit, but I
I
could
know.
go on and on about that bit. It was fantastic.
I know.
The journal entries that you put in there. There's
Yeah.
so many great things. If you haven't heard of her book, or if you haven't got it, or if you'd like to give it a read, I absolutely recommend it.
Oh, it's like a commercial. You can get it on Amazon.
You can get it on Amazon, and yeah, it's outstanding, Kathy. I'm proud of you for writing it.
Thank you.
It's an amazing chronicle of your journey from who you were to who you are, and I think it's fantastic, and I think everybody would benefit from reading it, especially if they are grappling with some of the complications that can come up from grief, or just trying to understand their grief and come to terms with it.
As a person, my friend, reading this about me, but if you're a friend of someone who's lost a person,
absolutely,
it's a good read.
It is.
It's a good book to get your friend. You don't have to have lost a spouse. You could have lost a father. You could have lost a sister. You could have lost a job.
Yeah.
It's about grief. It just really shows us. It's the reason I wrote it was because I couldn't find the book, but I also wanted to open the discussion for people to actually have their own discover their own stories of loss and talk about them. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back in the new year.
We will be, yeah.
2025.
Oh man, it's already 2025.
It's not already 2025. It will be
soon.
It will be soon. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us.
Like, share, and comment.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.